Welcome back, everyone. Just super happy to have you all here for our completion evening of COP26. Yeah, it's a special day, and we've been very touched by the continuity of the group that's been here with us, practicing witnessing, listening, attunement together, and just traveling together through these 12 days of presence at COP26. And right now, we actually, we're coming to the last hours. The negotiations were meant to end at 6 p.m. here in Glasgow. They haven't ended, so the negotiations are still going on. They're extending the conversations, and it might go well into tomorrow. Maybe they'll end later today, but I'm not sure. Yeah, and it's really not easy for these 200 countries to get to a document which everybody can sign on, and it's also like, sometimes people say, well, everything has been agreed beforehand anyway, before they even travel here, and that's true. But also in the conversations, things do shift and negotiators go back to their countries. We're hearing that some of the countries, especially those whose economies are partly driven by coal, are really slowing things down, because to sign something that says we'll phase out coal is hard for them. Other countries are keeping back on the financing, especially of climate change, adaptation, loss and damage to the most vulnerable countries. So there are several points that are being debated. And at the same time, we do know that this agreement that these governments are having such a hard time even agreeing on is far behind what we would love to see. This is not a clear expression of we, the leaders of the world, the countries of the world, are deciding to keep the planet safe for future generations. Even a 1.5 degree shift in temperatures is a huge shift for the life systems of the earth to cushion. But more than that, everybody's saying is going to be catastrophic. And the leaders of the world, of the governments, are not able to put that insight into practice. So that is sobering. And at the same time, many of us who've been deeply involved here at COP, many of the people at the heart of UNFCCC, like Sandrine Dixon, who we spoke to, but also many others, are sensing that there is a change of heart at the core of, I don't know at the core of who, I would say at the core of the zeitgeist, as we say in Germany, of the paradigm that we are functioning from. And I've also heard that many negotiators right now have gone out of the blue zone to protest with the protesters. So really showing their solidarity, bridging. This whole time it was like blue zone and then 3 fences and then outside the protests happening, and like bridging that, so which is maybe symbolic of what we're wanting to speak about tonight here. So we've experienced our presence at COP26 as a spark of allowing your witnessing online to enter the space. And we've had vision growing in us of creating a bare space where those voices that are not usually heard at the negotiation tables can be seen and heard within the space of COP27. That we could have a wall of screens, or let's say a globe of screens, where we can have people meditating and be visible in the space, people around the world praying and be visible, where we could have people from communities on the front line of climate change being visible, being heard. African women who are not at the table, who didn't get their visa, that we would see them, we would hear them, they would be present through virtual space, and much more. So this is what somehow we're feeling called to build on what we did together this year and maybe expand it towards Egypt. And then that whole framework, the call tonight with Karen O'Brien, just feels like it fits like the glove that perfectly fits on my hand. That's a very strange image to have come, but it just feels like it fits in so beautifully. And there has been a lot of synchronistic movement in how our speakers have appeared in our timeline. And it just feels really perfect to complete tonight with you, Karen. And thank you so much for being with us. So I'm just going to introduce you briefly. So we're here tonight to speak about quantum social change for a thriving world. And this could be our header for next year's Pocket Project at COP27. Quantum social change for a thriving world. So Karen is a professor at the University of Oslo in Norway and co-founder of Sea Change, an organization that supports transformation in a changing climate. Her research emphasizes the social and human dimensions of global environmental change. She has been named as one of the most influential researchers over the past decade and has written and contributed to many articles, books, and reports. In 2021, she was a co-recipient of the BBVA Foundation Frontiers of Knowledge Award for Climate Change. Her new book, You Matter More Than You Think, Quantum Social Change for a Thriving World, introduces a radically different way of thinking about climate change and social change. Inspired by ideas from quantum physics and quantum social science, this new approach, known as quantum social change, describes a conscious, non-linear, and non-local approach to the transformation needed right now. So we're with you, Karen, and we can't wait to hear more. And I just want to pass it straight over to you. Anything you would like to start off with right now after this introduction?
Thank you, Kosha. And it's really nice to be here with everybody. We're at the end of COP26, and I think it's really a great time to reflect on where we are and what comes next and what we can do and why it matters. And I think this idea of mattering really has driven me, sometimes the problem seems so enormous and we just feel like, oh, I don't matter. And yet I think what we sense is there are many people who feel that this situation is so enormously serious that that we have to change the way we think about mattering and change the way we relate to climate change as an issue, not just as an environmental issue, but as a social issue, as a human issue, and as a relationship issue.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And, all through our stay here at COP26 in the Blue Zone, we've been quite astonished again and again at the, it sometimes feels like in the actual negotiations, the actual table conversations, where the decisions are being made, it feels like it's all about technologies and money flows and data flows, but trading carbon from here to there, but not about transformation and not about the human dimension. And I remember speaking to Chad Frischman and asking about, oh, so extraordinary that in all your solutions the human being doesn't appear. And he said, yes, we're an accelerator, but we're not the solution, right? And yeah, we even found, like when Anna and I walked through the space, there's this great project which is led by the high-level climate champions for climate action, Nigel Topping and Gonzalo Munoz, which is the Race to Zero, mobilizing actors outside of national governments to join the Climate Ambition Alliance. But what they call the subline is Race to Zero, race against time and against ourselves. And to me, you know, we both stood below it and just thought, what a strange sentence, you know, race against time and against ourselves. And it's, yeah, so we would really like to hear from you. How does the social reality and the awareness, the consciousness of humanity, how does that come into the picture? What has your research shown so far?
Yeah, and my research is very much draws on lots of different bodies of research, and I think, you know, the starting point that you point out is that we've framed climate change as a technical problem, you know, one that can be solved with more knowledge, know-how, and expertise, and you know, we need, you know, the good research, we need better management, and it's really, you know, this kind of thing that exactly is like, okay, let's do it, let's, you know, and put money into this, put our, you know, brains into this. And there's a different type of problem that Ronald Heifetz and his colleagues call adaptive problems or adaptive challenges. And these are, you know, these involve our mindsets, our beliefs, our values, our worldviews, our paradigms. They really are like how we see the system, how we relate to it. And I think that when we approach climate change as a technical problem, and we're told by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that we have all the technologies, we can do this, and we have ingenuity and creativity, and yet we see that we're failing again and again and again. We have marching orders from 2015 that tell us that we really need to, we need to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. We know we have everything, and yet in this political sphere, we are not doing that. And I think that that is because we're really solving the wrong problem. And when you start to look at it as an adaptive challenge, it's about social transformations. It's about, there are very practical dimensions to it, but there are also very political dimensions. And there's also very personal dimensions. And this brings in consciousness. This brings in the way we, our experience of the world, the way we relate to it, and really, how we show up. And that brings me to, to this issue of like, how we actually relate to this idea of mattering and mattering in the moment. In many ways, when we look at it as a technical problem, we kind of keep pushing it forward, like 2030, 2050. I think I've even seen like 2070 goals. And, and the science itself is telling us that we are in the decade that matters, that because of tipping points, and you've probably heard this all week, that we're really at a crucial stage where we actually, given the science of climate change, how do we transform at the rate, the scale, the speed, and the depth that is called for by this science? And, so it's more about taking change and not just broadening it, but actually deepening that change into looking at, how do we relate to ourselves, to each other, to the environment, to the future, and not the least to change itself.
Sorry, I'm muted. Yeah, and I think, as you speak about rates of transformation, that you also speak about the 3 spheres of transformation. And I was very touched also by how you bring in the leverage points in a system and how Donella Meadows described those. So I wonder whether you could just introduce us to those spheres, because I think it would be helpful and illuminate our understanding more.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and I can actually show some slides if that makes it easier. Because I think, the 3 spheres of transformation are something that I've been developing with my colleague Linda Signa, and also with Dr. Monica Sharma and her conscious full spectrum response, putting it into the context of climate change and really looking at, like how do we shift systems and cultures? Because what we're talking about now is systemic change. We're talking about large scale change at something that at a rate and speed that we haven't really fathomed before. So how do we do this? And in looking at the three spheres, it's not that it's a heuristic. And I'm just going to share my screen and show the three spheres. The way that we've labeled them is the practical, the political, and the personal spheres, and that all of them are related to outcomes for sustainability. But Kosha, as you just described, there's so much focus on the practical spheres, the behavioral and technical responses that are needed. And most of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the 169 targets, are much, they're measurable. They're the practical things that we really do need to shift. So they are absolutely important, but we're putting all our energy into and resources into solving these technical problems. And I think that that's where we're failing to actually bend the curves of greenhouse gases and reach the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda. That's often because we're forgetting about the political sphere, the systems and the structures, the social and cultural norms, rules, regulations, institutions, incentives, how we organize society collectively in order to facilitate those practical changes that we want. And here is where, we really see, as you experience, this is where we're stuck, where the negotiations are stuck, where we've come up with a voluntary agreement to limit warming to below 2 degrees Celsius, but we're not moving in that right direction. So in the political sphere, this is where, how we organize society meets the conflicts of different visions for, what change should look like. And it's also where you get the social movements, where you get the activists, where you get everyone who came to Glasgow and is voicing their dissatisfaction with the political processes that are maintaining business as usual. And we've been stuck in the political sphere for decades when it comes to climate change. I remember how happy I felt and others felt after the COP15 when there was an agreement. It really, I think it brought tears to most of our eyes that wow, there has been progress, there is potential. But then we see that, often change is several steps forward and then many steps backwards. And so we're not where we need to be. And that's often because we're just ignoring the personal sphere. And by personal, I mean the individual and collective beliefs, values, worldviews, and paradigms. And this is really, how do we see the system? How do we relate to the system? How do we relate to reality itself? This is all in the personal sphere. And interestingly, when I present this often to, scientists or researchers, they nod and they say, yes, you're absolutely right. We need to change people's beliefs, values, worldviews, and paradigms. And so they're basically collapsing the personal sphere into the practical sphere and say, okay, let's just change people. And we run the risk, or I think we are actually turning people into objects to be changed in the name of, climate change, biodiversity loss, global, equity, whatever it is that we're trying to change people, rather than to kind of unleash that potential that everybody has to be an agent of change. And so my research is very much interested on that relationship between individual change, collective change, and systems change. And that's really where the You Matter More Than You Think project and book came out of, is really trying to get into those paradigms, because paradigms are very high leverage points for systems change. And the idea that we need to have a paradigm that sees us not in a fragmented way, like you work in the practical sphere, I work in the political sphere, and they work in the personal sphere, but that we're always, all of them, that we are showing up as wholes in this. And if you know Donella Meadows' seminal paper on leverage points, places to intervene in a system, that it was published in 1999, or it came out of a conference where she really was thinking about, how do we transform systems? And she points out that the lowest leverage are the constants, parameters, and numbers, and the size of buffers relative to flows. All of these things that are very much being discussed in climate change negotiations. What are the numbers that we need here? Should we agree on these words? And I think, she points out that 99% of our effort goes towards these low leverage points, and it often is pushing things in the wrong direction. So that's not where we should be. And she discusses a number of other leverage points that are stronger, including, the length of delays relative to the rate of change, the strength of negative feedback loops, reinforcing positive feedback loops, all of these things that, systems language, but they are actually, they have a role to play in life. We see that as energy prices go up, it creates systemic feedbacks on the price of oil and what we use and the price of products, etc. And so the structure of information flows is a high leverage point. The rules of the system is a high leverage point, and an even higher leverage point. And the power to influence system structures is even higher. And so that's where, the issues of, power to be able to create systems change becomes really important. But what we also see that, importantly, the highest leverage points are the goals of the system. So the 1.5 goal is enormously important because that puts into action lots of, changes in all the feedbacks and all the way down the line. But it really is like the mindset or paradigm from which we're actually creating the system that then becomes a really high leverage point. And the highest leverage point she points out is the power to transcend paradigms. And to me, that is exactly, and I'll stop sharing right now just to go back to this, but these are the leverage points in the personal sphere that I think we should be working at right now to actually, with changes in the political sphere, with changes in the practical sphere, recognizing that it's all one, where they're not separate. So to me, operating on paradigms and challenging our understanding of social change and the way we're framing climate change and climate change solutions is super important right now. And that's where I think that if we are in the decade that matters, then paradigms really do matter as well.
Yeah, wonderful. And as you speak about it, and I see this again, it just touches me how the whole climate negotiations are framed as negotiations, like an against and for, and, I want more, you want less, so let's negotiate this. It's like in the framing itself, as also in the way that democracy is interpreted as different parties fighting each other for more votes. There is this fragmentation which is inserted through the political system into the system of polarization, of pitting against. And we can see that here. And it feels like, as I think about, how does the sand come into the system? Or, because it feels as if there's something that wants to come through the goal, 1.5 degrees, and it's not coming through. Right? There's sand in the system, and it's like palpable. Even when you walk through the blue zone, it feels palpable in the atmosphere. It feels palpable in the drawn faces of the people, in the fact that there's so much focus just on the mind and such a neglect of emotion and body and aliveness and a lot of streams of information. So just to stay with the political system for a while, there's something about the rules of the games, that are the rules of the game, where how can we change that to, I'm thinking of, because you spoke about participatory agency and the transformation, like having participatory democracy processes or participatory goal setting where, everyone's opinion starts counting, and that becomes a motivational force that moves the political system. Like, I don't know whether...
Yeah, I think that's actually and a lot of the the negotiations are, and a lot of our actions today are still based on the fragmented us versus other, and it's very much like
Right.
we're drawing the lines between, us, other, mind, body, all of these dualisms. And that's where, in looking at what's emerging from quantum social science that draws on the metaphors, methods, and meanings of quantum physics, and how they can actually be used, you know, and what how do they change the lenses through which we're looking at problems? It's so important to recognize then that, that they are creating the sand, they are creating the fragments and the dust that is getting in the way. And how do we transcend that kind of view and really get to a perspective that resonates with many wisdom traditions and indigenous knowledge systems and things, to actually start to get to the we perspective, to see that it's both and, to see that that science itself is telling us that reality is not what it seems, and we haven't yet taken that to the social level to say that social reality is not what it seems. We've been constructed to compete with each other. We've been constructed, or like socialized into thinking of ourselves as separate, as meaningless and insignificant in many ways. And there's, it's very powerful to actually start to think about, like, what if I am the system? What if I am, the collective? And then to really think about, when I change, the system changes. And to me, that's really the nature of the whole Anthropocene, the whole idea that we're starting to see ourselves as part of one interconnected global system. And we never really think about how, mind-blowing it actually is for many to realize that we are transforming global systems like the climate system, and that we have that power then to transform economic systems, political systems, social systems in a more equitable and ethical manner. And I think that that's where, that little shift in the way that we see ourselves in relation to the system can be very powerful. And it goes beyond like global solutions and local solutions and, top down, bottom up. And it recognizes more of a fractal approach, like, how each of us in every moment, we can actually shift systems and create new patterns, fractal patterns that can be very unique to where I am, where my context, but it's also aligned very much with, what you might be doing, Kosha, and what people all over the world are doing and what they deeply want. And I think, to me, it's a quite, the solution is almost like simple yet complex, because how do we get there? And to do that, we actually do have to get out of our own way and step outside of a lot of these, structures and systems. And that for me has been, a personal challenge for myself as well, because I'm very much, in a academic institution, and where we're supposed to do things certain ways. And I think that there's, each and every one of us has the capacity to expand our sphere of influence and really have impact at scale, through a more fractal approach to social change.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear you speak about that and to feel that,
Mm-hmm.
because I think, I can just speak of myself, that it's an amazing process to slowly liberate ourselves of the fear that keeps us small. And as Thomas often says, we take the fear with us, it'll always be a part of us, but it takes courage to, within your academic institution, not leave it and turn against it, but say, oh, I'm going to speak out. I'm going to share my thoughts, even if they stretch or transform the paradigm that this institution is currently functioning within. It takes a lot of courage, right?
And vulnerability too, because I think we have to be
and
very
vulnerability. Yeah, so it's very edgy in the truest sense of the word, And I was just thinking also of, how very much the United Nations is built of nations, and the concept of the distinct nation is so much a part of the negotiations. It's one nation against another, and groups of nations coming together, and how even just the dissolving of the nation into the global being of humanity, and is a huge shift of paradigm that we're on the edge of, and that COVID, it has in a way also pushed us to, climate change, COVID, all the crises
Mhm.
are pushing us towards that shift in consciousness. So I think it would be wonderful. I know for many of us, we know about quantum physics. We've heard several, how electrons here influence electrons completely somewhere else simultaneously. And do we transfer that to human beings influencing each other? Multiple possibilities of reality collapsing into a particular reality as I look at it in a particular way. Those are kind of the lay woman's thoughts around, around quantum physics. But maybe you could share with us a bit more about how we might understand quantum physics and how we might apply quantum physics to social systems.
Yeah,
And
that's a great
please go
question.
slow for us.
Okay, well, I won't do a lecture on quantum physics because I'm not a physicist, but I think you very much kind of laid out that this idea that until we make a measurement, we don't actually, we live in an uncertain world, and particles and wave, an electron or a photon can be both a particle and a wave. There's quantum tunneling where it can move through barriers, and there's a lot of just different processes, but concepts such as entanglement, such as superposition, complementarity, potentiality, these are all like quantum words that describe subatomic relationships, and it's often been understood that this is only at the subatomic level, and we have a classical Newtonian reality where cause and effect are still the same. And I think over the last 100 years and decades, we've really challenged that there's not two different worlds. We live in a quantum universe, and those effects often wash out. And so ice melts at certain temperatures, sea levels rise. We have like classical world, but we also have where small changes can make a big difference. And for me, it's been really exciting to see that there is a field called quantum social science that even started in the 1930s, as the discussions and debates about quantum physics were really developing, that started to look about, what does this actually mean for society? And some seminal thinkers, Alexander Wendt in international relations, who really, helped develop the idea of constructivism, that the idea of a nation that Kosho you talked about is just a construction in our heads, and that how we, as nations aren't like real, they're ideas, and that we can, they can be what we want, antagonist or friendly or whatever. And he started to challenge his own viewpoint and said, like, if social science were developed today, it wouldn't be based on classical physics, it would be based on quantum physics. So he started to really look into this idea that, social structures aren't really real. They're just, they're ideas that we just keep almost like manifesting now and now and now and now. And they come out in a real reality that emerge in that very practical sphere as pollution, as, sea level rise, etc. But there's just, these ideas actually actualize in a certain way. And Karen Barad, a physicist and feminist, philosopher and thinker, her agential realism is really building on Niels Bohr's interpretation of quantum physics, that like the measurement matters, and that how we are intra-acting. And I think that's a really important difference, that in the negotiations there's interacting, one nation against another, and as if they're very separate, part of a global system but separate. And Karen Barad's work is on the idea of intra-acting, that we're all part of, we're all a whole part of a unified system, and that we're constantly interacting with each other. So drawing on these thinkers and many others, I got like, what does this mean for climate change? So I, like 2 a.m, I wrote to Alexander Wendt, and I was like, okay, this is really interesting stuff. And often when you say quantum anything, people just roll their eyes and go woo-woo science and everything. But he's such a well-known theorist. And he said, well, he came back after a few days. And so what I'm saying is that I think, we're one quantum social organism, and I think that really, that perspective is so important right now, to really be thinking, getting out of this us versus them perspective, and stepping back and seeing that we, like, not humans as the problems, but humans as the solutions. And that we are the ones that develop technologies, we use technologies, we abuse technologies. We are the ones that are creating all of these problems, and we are also the ones that are generating solutions. So to me, what this does is, and what the book tries to do, is really open up an inquiry, ask questions. And I think that, Einstein said, look for the people who are asking the questions. And David Bohm said, it depends. You have to ask the right question. And I think that is really, the point isn't to say that quantum physics is telling us this or that, but it's actually saying, we actually don't, there's so many different interpretations of reality. And, quantum Bayesianism, it's saying our bets on the future, our beliefs are actually, playing out in reality. And I just think it's fascinating, and it's important. And it makes me feel that, there's a lot of people who are willing to engage in these conversations, and rather than waiting, till we have, like, quantum brain science or some measurements and things, like, let's just start the conversation now. Interestingly, I don't know how many have read, Carlo Rovelli's 7 Brief Lessons on Physics, but in the end, he kind of is quite pessimistic about climate change and says, like, I think we're headed for extinction because we're not doing anything politically. And I just thought, wait a minute, there's so much social science, there's so much in the humanities that is showing us that our language matters, that we are entangled, we're connected through meaning, through mattering, through values, through, we are inherently connected. And so I thought, I'll just write a short book, and I thought it'll take me 6 weeks, and it's taken me 6 years, because I just keep reading, more, just thinking about, like, okay, what does this actually mean? And, and the really the so what. So I made a manuscript available during COVID, just like put it out there, and got lots of feedback, critical feedback, insightful feedback. And it really made me have to think, what does quantum social change actually mean? And someone pointed out, you never actually define it. So that's been my, thing. It's like, how do we actually start to define, what this actually is, and what does it look like? And to me, that is a collective project, rather than just it's a thought experiment, but it's a collective thought experiment. And that's why I'm really, I think these conversations can be really useful, because it's, if we really are in a decade that matters, then, and we really have to think about why you matter, why I matter, and why we matter.
Yeah. So, I love thinking about this, and I would love to become just a bit more concrete about what it might mean for us, and I have to confess here that it's a long time since I've read anything about quantum physics, so I would love to come back to some of those core terms that you used, like entanglement, multilocality, I don't know whether that's what you used, potentiality, the fractal nature of who we are. I don't know whether that has anything to do with, but to just explain in your imagination, in your thinking about this, what might they mean in the social realm? And if you could take us through them, is that possible, or is that asking?
Yeah, I think that I'm looking at comments coming up and going, I want to read all of those too. Yeah, I can try to do that, because it's very, like, there's a lot of different dimensions, and at the very, like, most simple dimension, the metaphors that we use, the language that we use when we talk about entanglements and quantum leaps and things. Metaphors have the capacity to change our reality. We live our metaphors, we live our stories. And so as language, when we talk about being entangled, we start to think about, entanglement at a social scale. And in a very classical sense, entanglement is like being twisted together, or I'm entangled in a bad situation or something. But in a quantum sense, it means non-locally correlated or co-related. So it means that there's not that I may, you make a measurement on me and you get information about Kosha, and you and it's not a it's not local, that something information has passed. So it actually isn't, action at a distance. It's actually correlation. And it's very hard for us to actually understand that from a classical perspective, what that means. And so entanglement from in physics is, they're working, it happens in a very particular situations. And when you get too much information, it washes out and you get a classical, a statistically probable outcome. And so we collapse the wave in a certain way that's determined by the wave function. But in quantum social science, we're looking at language as being an entangled phenomena as well, that we live, there's all these different interpretations and communications between the speaker and the listener. And so as we are, conversing and things, we're actually like connecting on a certain type of reality. And you can use words like concepts like carbon footprints, and that might mean something to somebody and something else to someone else. Or collaboration, you might be collaborating with fossil fuel industries, or collaborating with someone against you, or it could be a very collective movement towards something. So when we start to think about language as a quantum phenomena, and this goes into, this has been used for over 100 years in like what's called Q methodology, this idea that there's all these beliefs and ideas and statements out there, and it's not until we speak, our speech acts, our ways of actually conversing, that we land on a collective meaning. And I think we see in the COP meeting, people are really struggling to find those shared meaning, because words do matter. They commit us to something. They put us, they have an essence of responsibility. And that responsibility from Karen Barad's work is responsibility, our ability to respond. And so to be, almost like responsible in the moment, from that quantum perspective, is being, like that our actions and our words are aligned towards that larger whole. And so bringing in concepts like fractals, David Bohm talks about them. How do you generate new patterns? And it's not just like replicating things all over the world to be the same, but it's really like unity in diversity, and to be able to really see that we have, like that we are constantly creating and recreating patterns. And that goes into this idea that we're collapsing the wave, in every, a trillion times a second, whatever. And it goes into Alfred North Whitehead's process philosophy. We are processes, we are verbs, we are, relational human beings. And so, I could go on and on about all the different aspects and, ideas of, superposition and things. But at the end of the day, what does this mean in practice is a question I often get. And reflecting on that, it really means that practice matters, that it's, it's about being, kind of self-aware in the moment. And, Paulo Freire says, consciousness is consciousness of consciousness as consciousness. And so to being kind of that self-aware, how can I actually transcend these polarized conversations and connect to people based on the idea that we are entangled through values, through meaning. So these universal values that apply to everyone in all life: equity, justice, compassion. How do you connect with those? And to me personally, I find that that is a practice, because sometimes you want to go like, who are these people? Oh, why can't they just agree? Oh, and how do we connect people who have very different worldviews and very different interests and things? And then you realize we are connected. So how do you connect from that space? So it brings in this dimension, and that is in the, very much in that personal sphere, that how do, the personal, the political, and the practical are all one. So how do we show up in the moment and matter? And that is, we have, zillions of opportunities to do that every day, to shift the conversations, rather than to just, point fingers and say, you should do this, you should do that, you need to change. We can actually engage in different types of discussions and conversations. And I think, as we all know, that's not easy, but it is also, it can be very effective, because it's hard to change people, but it's very easy to, if you can connect with what matters to all of us. And that, I think, is when you start to think of fractals as really based on the values that apply to the whole system. And in this case, we're talking, the universe, and the, global, et cetera. then shifts can happen a lot faster than we think.
Yeah, wow. You know, it's like, it's so brilliant speaking to you, because it just feels to me, you know, in many ways, it feels like, yeah, just a different voice shining another light on a reality that I also hear Thomas so often speak from and to. You know, for instance, when he says, after a silent retreat, you know, so you've changed shape, you know, you have literally been heated up, have been transformed. So it's like a fork or a spoon that has melted, and now it will no longer fit into the drawer. So the drawer size needs to be changed, you know, as you try and fit back into your old life. You'll have to change the drawer, and you find it no longer fits in the kitchen cupboard. So you have to change the kitchen, and that means you have to change the house. But then the street no longer fits around the house. So, you know, that's one image that comes up as you speak. And it's, you know, also just, he often speaks about the way that if we are completely aligned with the original law and the light of creation, that the truth that the word spoken creates, the full power of the word is instantaneous creation. And, you know, you speak to all these points. So, you know, I feel like you're calling this like you matter, you know, to bring it into the space right now. Fully, you matter to each of us here today. So each word I say matters. And whether I can actually feel the meaning of the word fully, you know, the historic weight with which that word arrives, you know, or the weight of othering, that the emotion of othering that that word arrives with and is spoken, and how that co-creates reality, how I think about myself as mattering or not mattering, and the impact of that. So, you know, maybe this is also a beautiful moment to start speaking about the project that you've created called Sea Change, which is like a more concrete level of speaking about how much each of us matters.
Yeah, and I think that like from going from the like idea of mattering, you know, both in terms of significance, but also in terms of substance. And I think that in English it works very well. And Thomas phrases, and you phrase it very beautifully on that, you know, that we are mattering in the moment. And I think that is a very powerful way of thinking about how do we actually really create an impact for, you know, for a thriving world. And Sea Change is, you know, it really stands for like conscious change, creative change, collaborative change, and climate change. And I should mention that the book project really has been, you know, it became over the last year and a half a very close collaboration with a Norwegian artist who could take all the words and put them into beautiful artwork. And that was really that idea of collaborating and not just being like in our heads, but how to reach people's hearts. And when the manuscript was used in classes, I've had students come back to me and say, well, I didn't really understand all your abstract ideas, but the art spoke to me. And I think that is like, how do you speak to people? And, you know, being in an academic environment and publishing academic papers and things with, you know, references and things is you know, like, yeah, my mother's just like, looks nice, but I don't understand, you know. And so with Sea Change, we established it as a way to actually bring the research on transformations to the public, to be able to engage people with transformation, with a different perspective. And so very much based around the idea of the three spheres of transformation and the idea that you matter, and that mattering, you know, we show that through 30-day change experiments. We do that through different types of workshops that are really trying to put a different lens on climate change, so that people can really see that whether, regardless of where they're working, if they're, you know, in charge of like the cafeterias in Oslo or the train system in Paris, or, you know, you're a musician, whatever, that you actually you can do something that matters. And, we have, like a choir can be, the climate, they can do things in terms of climate change. So it's not that everyone has to become a climate change activist, nor does it mean that, everyone has to be an expert on this, but it's that we matter in our moment, in the context when we're aligned with the underlying universal values of equity, dignity, compassion, social justice, and really the integrity of the whole system. And that, I feel, is where we really, trying to bring that down into practice and putting it, working with schools and municipalities and businesses and citizens to really, so that their initiatives can have a bigger impact, has been really an important part of my work over the last decade.
One thing that touches me while you speak, Karen, is that somehow as I see you, I feel a lot of care coming from your heart, maybe, if I could say that. So, just as if there's a lot of heart in what you do. And at the same time, it's intellectually quite fast and complex as you speak. And I wonder, because we also do want to give some space to questions and responses from people and speak from that. But I would love if you could share too, how does it feel to be in your body right now and be with us? How do you experience how your care for the world expresses in this particular way of expressing yourself as a scientist?
Yeah.
How is it for you?
Well, to me, it's wonderful to be able to think like, wow, there's people on Zoom who want to hear about this. And, having worked with climate change since I first, 1988, when I first heard about it, when I was starting a master's program. And it's really been like front and center in my life, as it has been in many people's lives, that once you actually understand what we're doing, and together with the issue of biodiversity loss and many other, global environmental challenges, that it's just, for years there were very, people would just go, oh, here she starts talking about climate change, and to be like, okay, here we are, and there are so many people who are so engaged and caring about this issue that I care about. Is I feel like I feel like much more of a we, and that it's really just touching. And there are times, like through what I can be very like intellectual about the writing reports and things, but there have been really times when I've been working on, like an IPCC summary for policymaker on a Friday night, and just burst into tears when you get to this thing about, that it's very likely that we're going to experience 1 meter of sea level rise, at high, like, and then I just break down and I just think, oh, we can do better than this. And this idea that we can do better collectively is so important to me, that that it's not that to say that it's game over, to say that we need to just adapt to extinctions and things like that, it's just to me that is it's not okay in terms of responsibility to for life on the planet and for future generations. And I think it's so heartening, as you said in the introduction, to see that there's a like an awakening, of a bubbling up of, that's not just like an anger towards politicians, but this I think the mattering in a different way is really emerging. And maybe we wouldn't have had this conversation 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, but these type of conversations, I think, are so important right now. And that's why it's it's beautiful to be able to see the convergence of so many different strands of like thinking and activism and caring. And so I'm really just super excited and honored to be part of these conversations, and just hope that we actually collectively not just have hope for the future, but that we actually take the actions that matter right now.
Yeah, just noticing how much I am appreciating the work that you do, because like 10 years ago, I wrote a book about the power of collective wisdom. And I remember that at that time, Thomas was also very focused on the power of collective wisdom. Actually, as he dived through that. and into exploring, well, why is it not happening? Is, I think, as the collective trauma came so central. But it's as if the words that you use and the way that you speak about it within a social science framework opens up so much more possibility for us to have this conversation together. And it reminds me very much of this work that Thomas is doing to communicate between the mystical inner wisdom and then the science, the findings of new science. And it's so beautiful how they're coming together. And just today here, we were speaking with a Buddhist who was bringing the Lotus Sutra of Buddha present, and how even just speaking the Lotus Sutra of the Buddha unleashes kindness in the world, but also that the Buddha already spoke about that participatory agency that each of us has, and that no act of kindness would ever be lost in this world. You know, no caring action, whether it's to plant one seed, you know, would ever be lost. So it's really beautiful how this comes together. And I personally look forward to deepening conversations, maybe into how we might collapse this into one potentiality for the Pocket Project to bring to COP27, you know, but with your input. So really looking forward to that.
Yeah, thank you. I would love to do that, because I think that that is the potentiality is right here in front of us. And often I think about, like, you know, it's younger people that really inspire me. They're like, we're not in the box, Karen. You know, we're not like that. We actually are thinking, you know, differently. And I try to think, like, in 50 years or 100 years, when we look back, what were they thinking in 2022? And that there's many of the solutions, like, might be just so close in front of us, but we just can't see it. And I think that, to me, that idea that we are entangled and, you know, intra-acting is so clearly obvious and has been said through centuries and generations, you know, as you said with the Buddha, but many indigenous cultures are saying that, and yet power and politics was operating on a different operating system. And so how do we shift that right here and right now? And to me, it's really exciting, and to think about the possibilities of creating a new narrative for the next COP meeting.
Fantastic. So we'd love to work together with you on that. Yeah, and I know that people have put their hands up a long time ago and have kept their hands up and wanting to speak. So, you know, let's go there. And as always, you know, I ask you to keep your inputs and your questions very essential, so we can really keep the focus with Karen and also what more she might want to bring. So over to you, Michael.
Not able to. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Hi, Karen. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
So, Kosha's touched on a little bit these last couple questions, and I was really excited to hear about the art project that you were working on. We hadn't talked about that before. And, you know, I've had you and Alex Rent and many people talking about quantum social change on my radio show, but one of the things that happens so often is it gets relegated to the head, to the mind, and we're operating with a disembodied populace that can't even feel their emotions. They think them, but they can't feel them in their body. And I think that's what Kosha was getting to. And I'm just wondering other ways that this can be communicated. Like, well, one of the things I do is teach dance, 5 rhythms, for the last 40 years, but, you know, to get people in their body to be able to receive this on a more visceral, somatic, and emotional level. And I'm wondering other projects besides the art project would obviously begin that, or poetry, or other issues that can talk and take it below the mind. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful point, because again, in academia, we're, like really in our heads and thinking about this. And I'm like, I just love to read and write and think and everything, but how do you take it, to really embody it? And I've been contacted by a group of called Acting for Climate, and it's young people who are actually circus artists, and I've been working with them for the last couple years, and they were inspired by the manuscript for the book. They did an exhibit called Bark, and on like out in the forest and the trees, and they tried to put the book to dance and to acrobatics in a forest. It was actually in Denmark where they performed it, and I think we're performing it in Finland. And I think that that's exactly what we really need to do, is to take it into different ways and in different interpretations, and it might not look the same. And I was asked by the University of Oslo's women's choir is like a leading choir in the world, and they want to do a climate concert. And so with a colleague at Sea Change, who was part of that, to come up, create, like, inspired by the book, create words for a composer to put to music for the choir to sing next May. And so to me, that is where we have to go. And so it's like, here is like, and a book isn't, it's just an input to other things. And I think that that's where we have to really think about, like, okay, and where from here? And the artist Tone Bjørdam has an exhibit, and her work, I think, really speaks to people more than like concepts and abstractions and references and things like that. And to me, when I talked to you, I hadn't actually started the collaboration. It started with, like, can you do a few figures? Then it became a really beautiful, everything all the way to the fingerprint on the front cover as being art, and to different fingerprint scenarios. Yeah, I wish I could just show you all. You can look at youmattermorethanyoutthink.com and get an idea of just the beauty of, like, how art can speak to people more than concepts.
One of the things I love that you've probably heard Thomas say, seeing me, seeing you, seeing me, and then stating that as over there in Norway you occur as a point, but over here you show up as a wave. I thought that was perfect for the quantum social change, to have that in the background, to be knowing that that's available. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, bye.
And I could say, I just saw that the artist is Tone Bjørdam, Bjordam, and I think it's Tone, TONE, BJORDAM.com. And she's like does a beautiful work on bringing science to life, including, she works a lot with resilience and tipping points and things. So TONEBJORDAM.com. So one word, I could maybe write that in there.
And Karen, there were 2 times people asked about a woman that you mentioned. Another Karen, and then
Karen Barad, Barad.
Okay.
Yeah,
great.
and she has she's had been a very influential thinker in terms of agential realism, and her book Meeting the Universe Halfway is a very like academic tone, but I think it resonates with a lot of the relational perspectives on social change.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Anna, also for bringing that in. And I also saw when I saw another conversation of you, that you quoted Andreas Weber, who's a biologist from Germany, who really writes and thinks very deeply about the emotionality of everything and how much emotions, the flow of emotions, matter. So I think that was also, Michael, you didn't speak directly, because often we speak to the body but not the emotions. So I think it would be wonderful also for us, if we do an ongoing series in the Pocket Project, to invite Andreas, who's also a friend, and to explore that more deeply. Thanks so much, Karen.
And I think his enlightenment worldview really is an expansion of the Enlightenment. It's not like saying it's not this, it's that, but it really is expanding the conversation to bring in subjectivity and emotions and meaning and spirituality, consciousness, and things into the science itself. And I think that's he's done a wonderful job with that.
Yeah. And I saw, Larissa, that you had your hand up before, and then I think you took it down again. But I think before you leave, it would just be wonderful to hear your question. So if you're around, I would love to invite you to unmute and bring whatever it was you wanted to bring.
Okay,
Over
thank
to
you.
Larissa.
I thank you for your presentation, and particularly for the graphics. I found them very illuminating, the three spheres and the leverage points. And I just wanted to say, for one, about the leverage points that, you know, the power, that as the highest power, I would have liked to hear you talk a little more about that, because as has come up in the conversation, art, you know, immediately occurred to me as very powerful manifestation of that. And the second one that occurred to me was wisdom teaching. And that brings me to my the main thing that was on my mind, which Michael's comment sort of partially addressed. And it was about the quantum physics aspect when you and Kosha were talking about that. So my understanding of quantum physics has, you know, broadly and crudely been that it's scientific materialism's version of what wisdom teachings have been telling us for thousands of years, in which we have recently begun to elevate to its proper place in our understanding of things. So I just, but you didn't reference wisdom teachings as one of your sources, you know, for your work.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to
Yeah.
hear what you had to say about that concept of mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that I mentioned that, and it goes back to like the Tao of physics, and you know, like a lot of people have written about that, and even Niels Bohr himself. There were a lot of you know, the philosopher Ken Wilber has really talked about how many physicists were actually mystics, you know, and so that kind of bringing indigenous worldviews, but really like trying to speak to my audiences, the, you know, the global change researchers who are very focused on the technical, you know, it's a carbon dioxide problem. So using that as an entry point to get them to see that, if you look at Native American traditions, if you look at, you know, like there's so many other ways of saying this the same way that have been said, and there's many different pathways to discovering this. So I you know, I acknowledge that, like, wow, there's, you know, what, and I think that that's maybe the biggest lesson from research is that you find out that, you know, William James was saying this earlier, and people have been saying this for centuries or thousands of years, or as you know, like Thomas pointed out, like the Buddha, it just goes back to that. And that I think is where, you know, like going to start, you know, your question about the leverage points, and the highest leverage point being the capacity to transcend paradigms and recognize that these are all just beliefs, and kind of laugh at that is what Donella Meadows puts. And I think, you know, leverage point is a very mechanistic metaphor, you know, that we're pushing this or that, but you know, we are the leverage points. We are the ones that are actually, you know, having this impact on the world. And I think to go away from looking out there for the leverage points to actually recognizing ourselves as having that power and potential to influence the entire system is what is, you know, super important here. And bringing in then that, you know, it is almost like a using that as a way to deepen the conversations, because right now, you know, we've seen that we're failing again and again and again when we're just trying to figure out, you know, like you know, the numbers and how to get people to agree on these targets and put them into action. And it's going to take a very different type of approach. And I think, like, you know, thinking in terms of fractals and relationships and things, but in, you know, that there is a inherent, you know, the values that we hold, it links into the wisdom traditions. And it kind of like, I think, brings us home. And both Alexander Went and Karen Barad in their work, that it is kind of like finding our place in the universe and, you know, for meeting the universe halfway, or actually realizing that this, you know, the I, the we, the wholes and the parts, that these are all these dualisms are, you know, like in our head.
Constructions.
Yeah, constructions. And so how do we get out of that? So to me, the so what of this book really is that practice matters. And I think then, whether it's meditation, whether it's just kindness, or that, we just have to really start to practice being in the moment and mattering in the moment for the, benefit of the whole. Because we can't have a world where some people thrive and others don't, or some species thrive and others don't. It has to really be a world that works for everyone and all life. And that is, that is that challenge, but based on, like certain principles and values, it's not that, the teachings are there. We can get them in kindergarten, and it's like, it's not that hard, but how do we get ourselves out of our own way for this? So
cultivating our consciousness, as Philip Shepherd talks about.
Yeah, thank you. Those are great questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Larissa.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I've also just written into the chat that I'd love to go with the voices that haven't spoken here before. So Barney, Nela, huge apologies to you both. We have only very little time now left. So I'll go to you, Elizabeth. And then if you can, if it's possible to keep it essential, but I don't think we'll even have time for you, Crystal, so sorry. But do write your questions, your thoughts in the chat. That would be lovely.
Hello. There's I'm not really a scientist. I'm more a spiritual person, and but I look at things about changing things on the planet, and I see the planet as a living being that as well invites forces from universal forces on the planet for change to happen. And when I heard you speaking, and I wanted to ask if this is what you mean with quantum changes in the past, when we had the Renaissance, and in the Renaissance, everything's in the form of the art changed, and the people got a complete different kind of how to draw things. When you see the paintings of Albrecht Dürer, how he started with this two-dimensional form and ended up with this magical things, and how the art changed, how the towns changed, how the wisdom changed. Is this what you mean with quantum social change? Or is this quantum? No, so it's wrong word. Change. Is it something like that, what happened in the past but wasn't picked up, and now we have this world connected to internet and everything much more connected, that this could happen?
Yeah, I think, I would define quantum social change as a conscious, nonlinear, and non-local approach to transformations that are grounded in our inherent oneness. And so, recognizing that we are entangled through language, through meaning, through our values, and even the shared context, on this planet right now, and that our deepest values and intentions are potential sources of individual change, collective change, and systems change simultaneously. And I think that, we actually, can start to, think differently. And, they say, change the way you look at things, and the things you look at will change. And when you start to open up to that potentiality that exists, and to the alternatives that are right in front of us, right here, right now, and science is telling us over and over again that we have so many solutions. And Chad Frischman Drawdown and Paul Hawkins Drawdown Project, there's and his new book Regeneration, is they're saying these things, and how do we connect with that? So I think that and I struggle with that, because I'm we often are in a very consensus reality of this is the way things are, and to be able to step back and say, wait a minute, what if, and what if? And I think that is a lot of it is just open those conversations, and to and then have those feelings of oh, I see things differently, and I see opportunities where I didn't see that. And I think collectively there's so much anxiety about the future now, and fear, that my concern is that we skip over social change and we go right for geoengineering of the atmosphere, or terraforming Mars, or looking for the technical solution, the big fix, rather than what's right in front of us right here and right now. And that is really about that connecting the personal, political, and practical into how do we as agents of social change and systems change.
I have hopes that this will happen because it happened in the past. Like the start from Christianity was such a change. And that it's like always people wanted something different, like the Roman Empire. But there comes this person, Jesus, along and says, maybe think about it like that. And people think, yeah, why haven't I thought about it beforehand? And I think maybe this kind of change can happen. So the people might want to do it in a physics way, doing social engineering things and things, but life happens and things will be different. I hope. This is my big hope. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay, thank you. That was a great question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you so much, Karen. And this is quite, I feel like we've been taking everybody on such a journey here, to look at, listen to very different voices, very different worldviews in a way in this space, and I can really feel how it stretched us as a group. And my sense is that that is healthy, as we think about that leverage point of shifting paradigms, being able to change paradigms. I feel that stretching our awareness and allowing very different views of reality to enter is such a healthy ingredient. So I want to hugely thank you, Karen, for what you brought. I hope that many people go and get your book and get immersed in more depth of what you have to share with us. And I trust that we can dance together in preparation for next steps, not only at COP27, but starting now. Thank you so much to you.
Oh, and thank you to you too, and for everyone for joining, because it really does, it's so, I feel like it's so, fantastic to have people who really are, I think climate change is stretching all of us, and for people to be able to sit and be with it and have these conversations that push us to thinking like, what do we do now? It's like, it makes me, go to bed happy tonight. So.
Great. So thank you. And we look forward to continuing the conversation with you.